From this 1970 first ever Dodge Challenger that your dad fell in love with, to the first ever 8-second production muscle car ever, here's a history of the Dodge Challenger. The Dodge Challenger is one of the fairly newer cars Dodge has introduced to the lineup, with the first ever model being created in 1970, and this car was one of the two Chrysler E-Body style vehicles, with the other vehicle being the Plymouth Barracuda. The Challenger was designed to compete against cars such as the Mercury Cougar and the Pontiac Firebird in the upper end of the pony car market segment at the time, and you could also say that this was Chrysler's rather very late response to the Ford Mustang that was introduced 6 years prior. And because of that, Chrysler really wanted this car to do good, so they made it available in more than 8 trims with 8 different engines to choose from, and these engines ranged anywhere from a 198 cubic inch slant 6 engine all the way up to a 440 cubic inch 7.2 liter V8 engine. And I also think it's worth noting that the Challenger initially came with a convertible package available as well, which is something I wish that they continued doing to the new models as well. But 1970 was also the year that we saw trims such as the RT and the TA being introduced to the lineup as well. And with this car being such a hit in the market, Dodge kept the production going, but they did drop some of their less famous trims, and they also gave the car some cosmetic variations by adding the bumper guards on the 1973 Challengers. Unfortunately for Dodge and its competitors, 1973 was also the same year that the oil crisis happened, which essentially made all gas guzzling V8 pony cars become obsolete as people could no longer afford them, and because of that, Dodge had to cut production of the Dodge Challengers in the year 1974. About 4 years later, in the beginning of 1978, with the oil crisis still having its full effect on the car market and people preferring smaller imported 4-cylinder vehicles to the V8 pony cars, Dodge decided to make a rebadged variant of the early Mitsubishi Galant Lambda Coupe as the Dodge Challenger second generation. And it's safe to say that this car was not a hit like the first Dodge Challengers were, which made Dodge have to make some changes. Like in 1981, they revised the bodywork and increased footroom, headroom, trunk capacity, and even soundproofed the vehicle. And another reason this car wasn't a hit was because it came with smaller engines such as the 1.6 liter inline 4 engine and even a bigger 2.6 liter inline 4 as well. But regardless of the modifications Dodge made to this car, it still was not a hit, so Dodge had to cut down production of the Dodge Challengers once again in 1984. It's now nearly 30 years later in 2008 when Dodge decided to introduce their third and final generation Dodge Challengers at the Chicago Auto Show, and this car came with engines ranging anywhere from a 3.5 liter V6 engine all the way up to their 6.1 liter Hemi V8 engines producing 425 horsepower, and those cars were labeled as the SRT8 trim, which you could also get in a 6-speed manual transmission starting in 2009. And Dodge fans all over the country were excited for the return of the infamous Dodge Challengers, so they started putting down deposits for their own vehicle. And in 2011, Dodge even decided to boost their horsepower on their SRT8 models and switched out the 6.1 liter Hemi engine with a bigger 6.4 liter Hemi engine that now produced 45 more horsepower, bringing the car's total horsepower to 470. But besides that, not much changed to the Dodge Challengers until the year 2015. And in 2015, the Dodge Challenger received a new facelift and saw trims like the SRT8 retire and instead replaced with the SRT392 and the big boy SRT Hellcat, which now produced 707 horsepower from a 6.2 liter supercharged V8 Hemi engine. And the Hellcats flipped the script for Dodge as they went from competing behind Ford and Chevrolet with the Ford Mustang and the Chevrolet Camaro to now being ahead of the pony car game with the ultimate muscle car. And now with Dodge running the muscle car game, they decided to up the ante, and in 2018 they introduced us to the Dodge Demon, which now produced 840 horsepower from a supercharged Hemi engine, and it also did wheelies from the factory. A side note, you could get this awesome Demon crate with this car for an additional $1. But since this car was a limited version vehicle with only 2,000 ever being produced, Dodge had to find a new fast trim to add to their lineup to keep up with this new demand they created, so they introduced us to the Dodge Challenger Hellcat Red Eye in 2019, which now made 797 horsepower, a massive 90 horsepower bump compared to the original Hellcats. And just when Dodge thought things couldn't get any better, they were hit with a reality check from the government, informing them that they can no longer continue making these gas-guzzling V8 engines and they have to move toward an electric vehicle, which goes all the way against the kind of cars that Dodge wanted to build, but Dodge had to oblige and informed us that 2023 will be the final production year of the Dodge Challengers, but not before they go out with a bang, and that's when they introduced us to this beast called the Demon 170, which produces 1,025 horsepower and it does the quarter mile in 8.96 seconds, making it the fastest production muscle car ever. And with this being the third time Dodge has stopped production on the Challengers and the first two not being effective, I'm hoping that in the future we will be able to see a 4th generation Dodge Challenger that's hopefully not an electric vehicle.